Sorry about that. So anyway, for Monk, God was a threat, something to be feared. His father, of course, was a threat. His father actively abused him. The other was a threat. And by the phrase the other, I mean an other human being, or any kind of other. A group, so in the United States, we make of Muslims the other. There's us and them, right? They're the terrorists. They're whatever we say. Stuff like that. Communists in the United States, communists are the other. In an important way, Jews are the other. Things like that. When you make somebody or some group or something the other, what that means is that you feel there's a sense of disconnection, a difference, inability to relate to the person or group or thing or whatever. So for Monk, the other, and this is specifically other people. I mean, his paintings focus on other people. The other is always a threat, and they cause anxiety and fear, and because you can't connect to the other, because you're afraid of what they'll do, or what they'll think of you, or how they'll judge you, or if you're too fat, or if you're too ugly, or if you're too weird, or how they're going to hurt you. When you feel that way about other people, you can't connect to them. And when you can't connect with other people, you're lonely. And when you're lonely, you despair, and you feel anguish, and life isn't very worth living without intimate connections with others. But Monk was a sad and tortured man, and his art illustrates that sense of disconnection that comes from, in large part, his experience of the world. It's sickly, it's threatening. He didn't see it as a happy, welcoming, nurturing place. He didn't see it as a place where he felt at home or loved. He was outside, and he was in pain, and he represented that very well. I think his paintings are sad, and they speak to the part in all of us, or the experiences in all of us, that understand what it feels like to be alone, and to be afraid. So nobody in this painting is, and this is a death. I mean, this is the time when families and friends need each other, and they need to support each other and hold each other up. And none of them are doing that. They're all experiencing it privately in their own way, and they're not talking to each other about it, and they're not regaling each other with fond memories of the dead loved one. They're all sick and dying in their own way, and if they can't ever connect, I think an important part of them, of all of us, will die. And we see that here. The fact that it's called the sick room, I mean, you would call a room the sick room if that's where the sick and dying person is being stationed until their death. But I think that we see that the dead person who was once sick but is now dead He's not the only person in this picture, in this room, who is sick. Everyone is sick. And by that, for Monk, it didn't mean that everyone is perverted or not that kind of sick. For him, it meant that everyone is sad and afraid and alone. And that is sickness, that is illness, and it feels terrible. And his paintings often illustrate someone who tries to reach out, but they're always thwarted. They never connect. It's sad. The next one, Evening on Carl Johan Street, is one of my favorite of his. First of all, so you see the crowd on the sidewalk that's walking mostly toward the viewer, and then there's the one lone figure over there on the right. It's said that is supposed to be Monk himself, and he's all in black, and he's walking away from the viewer, and he's alone. So certainly that represented how he felt about his life, himself. But if you look at these people, you can really sort of, there's the woman in the front, and she's the one who's most in focus. And then there's the man that's a little bit next to her. And there's something similar about the shape of their faces. Normally when I teach Expressionist artists, I just ask my students to point everything out, which is better. And students have wonderful things to say about Edvard Munch. So I'm sorry that you can't voice your ideas, together, but well, online class, so it goes. But their faces, first of all, the woman doesn't seem to have any hair. Obviously if it's there, and, the assumption is that it is, it's under her hat or whatever, but, you don't even see it sort of, sticking out a little bit just on the sides or anything. So you can really just see the shape of her face, and then you can really see it in the man next to her. You see the shadows that he painted, the gray shadows right there, the gaunt cheeks, right? And then the shape of the face, especially without hair, is skull-like. They look like skulls, sort of a walking dead. And the eyes, they're just huge. And look, the man's face really looks, there's a real sense of terror, fear, anxiety. He looks very concerned. He looks upset. The eyebrows are, that's what happens. Maybe I can't see anything. I'm blind as a bat. I can't see, but one of the fear responses is to the eyes open wider. That's instinctual. You can't, it's just a reflex in the fear response. So your eyes open, and when your eyes open, your eyebrows go up. It's called something. The eyes open to bring in more light, so you can bring in more data about the thing that is, scaring you, so you can, fight or flight, right? So the more data you get, the more quickly and easily you can decide if you need to fight or flight, right? But anyway, his eyebrows are up like that, and so are hers, but I think it looks more obvious in his face. And then, again, there's just all these figures. None of them, I don't know if this man and woman are walking together, or if they're just happen to be on the street at the same time. They are strangers. But again, nobody is looking at each other. Nobody is smiling. Nobody looks happy. Nobody is connecting. And it's just this crowd that we're always in, and you can be in a crowd in Walmart and feel more alone than when you're actually alone. Sometimes I think that being alone in a room and just sort of reading a book or watching your favorite TV show or doing whatever, you don't necessarily feel lonely, even though you're actually alone. But when you're in a crowd and there are people all around you, sometimes maybe it reminds us that I can't say anything to these people. I can't. And they look at me. And what are they thinking? And I'm with other human beings, and I feel so disconnected. I mean, you don't have anything to be disconnected from when you're sitting alone in your room, you know, doing your homework or whatever you're doing. You don't have anything to be disconnected from because there's nobody there. So of course you're going to be alone. Sometimes it's when we're around people, strangers or our families or our friends, that we realize that how well do I really know this person? How well does he really know me? Are we as good of friends as we say? How much are we not saying to each other? Probably a lot. For Monk, the world is full of people, but that doesn't mean you're not alone. And this next one, this is one of my favorites. A lot of students have really enjoyed this piece. I do as well. Dance of Life. The students have made much of this piece, and they have actually given me a lot of insight. I mean, I think this one is highly symbolic. So we see the couple in the middle, and then on the left side, and by the way, like, you know, we read from left to right. The left side is the woman in white, and she actually has something of a smile on her face. It sort of, and her cheeks actually look like they're a little bit rosy. She does look somewhat cheerful. And then the woman on the left is in black. Her eyes, I mean, you can't see her eyes. They're downcast. I mean, she's clearly looking down. You can't see her eyes. You can see the woman in white. You can see her eyes. And of course the woman in black too is, you know, she has her hands folded in front of her and she's looking down, and he uses a shadow on her cheeks, but it is a shadow. I mean, he uses a gray color right there on her cheek. And whereas the woman in white, it's a pinker, more reddish color. The eyes are different. And the woman in white, her skin is white, right? I mean, he uses white and whatever tan paint. The woman in black, I mean, her hands, it's a gray, but some black in there. But she's obviously, okay, just in terms of quote-unquote race, they're both white women. But, I mean, look at the difference in the way he uses the paint on them, on their skin tones. And then the couple in the middle, you see all these other couples dancing, though. And the couple in the middle, they're dancing. Do you get the sense that they're happy? Look at I mean, you can't see their eyes. The man is clearly not smiling. The woman, you can see just a hint of red from the side where the lip is. Her eyes, you can't tell if she's looking down or if he just didn't put in the pupil, or what it is. But they're dancing because they have to. They're not getting joy out of this. And if you look at the other dancers, you can't see anybody's face except for the one guy right by the woman in black. He looks sort of frightening. The dance of life. You grow up, you get married. And for Monk, look, marriage was not this happy state of falling in love and then deciding to spend your lives. That is not what he saw of his parents. And his father was a terrible person who tortured his mother just as much as he tortured his children. And the woman in white, maybe she has some kind of hope. Maybe she's young and idealistic, white, virgin, right? Inexperienced, hasn't been married yet, blah, 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 blah. That stuff, pure. All that talk. She's hopeful for the future. And then the next picture is the marriage, the dance. And it is not a happy one. And then the woman in black, death, the end of life. And what does life do to us by the end? And what does it do to women, too? It's interesting that he uses women here. What did it do to his mother, being married to his father? What does life do to all of us? It beats us down. In the end, we have to mourn for our once young, idealistic, carefree selves who had such hope for the future, for romance and fulfillment and children and wisdom and experiences. And then we get all those things, or we don't, and they're nothing like what we thought. And by the end, we're just old and tired and sad. Keep in mind, I mean, you know, this is art from a man who is clearly tortured. And so you don't have to agree with this idea that this is all life is. But look, I mean, he's not just coming out of left field here either. All of the sadness and the fear and the anxiety and the hurt and the disconnection, that might not be all that life is, but it's certainly a big part of what life is for all of us. And I think that is why people like Monk so much, not because they're all just pessimists or unhappy, but because the part of them, the part of any of us, that does experience these things, that does know what he's talking about, that has felt this way, we can relate, and it speaks to us. And there's a way in which it's so sad that he felt so alone. But seeing his art can remind us that when we're feeling alone, that so many other people feel the same way. And maybe that means that we don't have to feel so alone. And maybe it means that once in a while we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. We allow ourselves to take a leap and talk to somebody about feeling alone. And when you open that door with someone you trust, and you find out that somebody does understand you, not just Monk, but someone you care about in your life, you're not so alone anymore. You don't feel alone anymore as much, but you're also just not. Because you've started to do what Monk could never do, which was to stop being afraid of other people so much that he let himself open up to them. But that requires a lot of courage. But, you know, maybe that's one of the reasons it's so important to see this kind of art or think about it. He can teach us how to be better than he was. I understand the feelings that Monk expresses, expressionism, but I don't want to get to the end of my life and have this as my legacy. I don't want to live my life feeling like this all the time. It's not worth it. Sometimes you have to just talk to somebody and trust that they're not going to think you're weird or having feelings. Now, the scream, what was the other one I put on here in despair? Anxiety. You'll notice that the next three then, the scream, despair, and anxiety, all take the same form in appearance. They're all on this sort of walkway that's like a boardwalk over the sea or whatever, with the sky, the red and yellow sky that's sort of swirling a bit, wavy, and you'll notice, and it's obviously it's easy to see in despair and the scream how the walkway sort of the angle of the perspective just sort of, I mean, it's very extreme. It just shoots away from you. It's an extreme angle. Monk, in regard to the scream, said, I mean, this is, I'm not going to get it verbatim, but this is a quote that I've read to my students many times. He said, after he'd after he'd painted this piece, I heard a scream run through nature, and the sky turned to blood. Everything was screaming. And we see the two figures who are further down the walkway there, who don't appear to hear the scream. And again, the skull-like cadaverous face, no hair, sort of worm-like. And the sky is heaving. And sometimes nature, the world, looks so threatening. And of course, Munch was familiar with art that was done before him. So the Romantics, who understood nature to be the greatest illustration of God, and in fact, nature to be God in an important way, and the best way in which they could experience God and know God and feel that kind of love and connection inside of them. But we see, I mean, Munch's relationship with God was one of absolute fear because of his father. So for him, the illustration of the greatness of God is not one of connection. It's not like Byron, right? Byron's solitude, when he says, you know, to be sitting in nature, this isn't solitude. 'Tis but to hold converse with nature's charms and view the beauty of her stores unrolled. But then, amidst the hurry, the crowd, the shock of men, whatever the line is, so on and so forth, this is to be alone. This is solitude. A crowd of people is where we cannot find connection, but nature is. Nature is beautiful and comforting and full of friends and family. And that was standard romantic thinking. And it's beautiful. But for Munch, nature and God, the greatness of these things is something that will squash you, and it is a threat, and it is terrible, and it will punish you, and it wants to, and it's not something that you, in awe, you adore, and you allow it to take you in and fill you up, and it makes you feel like you're one with it. That's the romantic ideal. That's how they felt. But for Munch, it will swallow you up and chew you up and torture you. That's how he felt. And he could never find God. He just couldn't find the God he was looking for, the God that everyone is looking for. I mean the word, when I use the word God, I mean that very loosely here in a symbolic way. The meaning, the purpose that everyone is looking for in life is love, is connection, is to not be alone, is to share our lives with others, to feel deeply fulfilled, and he just couldn't find it. Every place he turned, all the things that could have fulfilled him, that normally fulfill human beings, God or a wife or children or family or friends or nature, all of those things he saw as terrifying, as threatening. How can you not be lonely? How can you not feel like everything around you is screaming in agony? Sad. I mean, despair, the next painting, despair, is, I think, self-explanatory, I guess. Obviously, this figure is very despairing, and he's alone, and then anxiety, one of my absolute favorite paintings by Munch. We can see the faces of the people pretty well, and we see the eyes and the beady little pupils and the cadaverous faces. again, no one's connecting, no one's looking at each other, everyone looks fearful, unhappy, or at least just nothing. I mean, they're going through the motions. They're dressed in their, their appropriate dress, and they're following social mores, and they're quiet, and they're hiding inside. By the way, at this time that Munch was painting this stuff, this sense of a loss of meaning, this fear of the other, this is what we mean when we talk about modernism and postmodernism. At the same time that Munch was doing this, Freud was also writing about how, that what we are as what a human being is the id, ego, and superego, all that talk. But the id, this is verbatim from Freud. What we really want to do is rape and pillage and slaughter and destroy, and that might be a little extreme, but for many people, I think there are plenty of people who really do want to do that stuff, and they do, and they're awful. But he said that society was just this sort of way of keeping us in line, way of keeping the id in line, but because the id, you're not allowed to bring it out now. It has to manifest itself in other ways, and blah, blah, blah. But there's this suggestion that there's something hiding underneath, inside, something brutal, something fearful, something dangerous, the authentic self that just wants so badly to get out. And it can't, and we won't let it, and we won't talk to each other about it, and we're never real with each other, and inside we're all just dying, and it's sick. It's just a sick, poisoned, the world, all societies, because they all do this, and they suffer from this, are all just poisoned. And Friedrich Nietzsche is the great philosopher, German philosopher, who wrote in the late 19th century, and he's the man who originally said God is dead. Didn't mean it literally, because that doesn't make any sense. God is this symbol of meaning and purpose and value, moral value and otherwise, and the suggestion there being that there is no meaning inherent in the universe. You don't mean anything. God doesn't have a plan for you. There is no right and wrong, morally speaking, that God hands down or the universe hands down. All of that stuff is man-made, and in fact it's our duty to create our own value, which can be very liberating, by the way. But when I'm, as a woman, if I buy into the idea that value has already been created, then I think that what I'm supposed to do is get married, have children, be thin, worry about my looks, have a certain kind of body otherwise, breasts, act in a certain way, have certain preferences, blah, 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 blah. Because that's what, culture has told me I'm supposed to be or do. And when we buy into that stuff, and men have plenty of things that they're supposed to be or do too, when we buy into that stuff, we are not authentic anymore. We're not who we are, and we hide it inside. So Nietzsche said, look, you don't need this. You don't need this belief and in fact, you don't need it, and it's not there for you to have. This belief that meaning is created for you, you create it. And if you don't think that that's what it should mean to be a woman, or that being a man means that you're not supposed to show any emotions other than, like, wrath, I guess, rage, then don't. Create yourself and tell everybody else to fuck off if they don't like it. Nietzsche says very famously, become what you are. Do not let anyone tell you who to be, ever. When we do, this is the result. Monk is the result. Hiding inside, terrified to speak, to say who we are and how we're feeling, to be who we are. And we can't even look at each other. So, all this stuff at this time, it's a super interesting time in art and philosophy, and it's, yeah, man, very interesting stuff. Yeah. Anyway, so that's that. Now, Francis Bacon. And I put up the little subtitle, Man as Meat. Bacon, funnily enough, his last name is Bacon. I love it. Funnily enough, he said famously that if you want to know a truth about humanity, all you have to do is look down at the meat on your plate. Bacon was British. He was born in Ireland. He died, like I said, in 1992. And he was a strange man. I have the first one that I have up here, a portrait after Velasquez, Pope Innocent X. I have this hanging in my living room, and people often, my guests often comment on it. It's one of my favorite paintings. It may even be my favorite painting of all time. I should have put this up. I'll put it up after I'm done with the video. This is his version of a painting done by the artist whose name is Velasquez during the Renaissance, of the Pope at the time, Pope Innocent X. And when you look at that painting, the original one by Velasquez, it's a portrait. That guy, the Pope, first of all, Pope Innocent was not a nice man. And you can tell from the painting, he looks malicious. He looks scheming and conniving. I mean, he does not look like what we think, I guess, a man of God should be, which should be filled with the universal love and compassion and humility and everything of Jesus Christ. But, of course, the Catholic Church doesn't have a history of being anything like what Jesus said. So, I guess that doesn't make, or that's not a big surprise. But anyway, so then Bacon did, and he did a number of Pope paintings. In fact, I put up at the next one, Figure with Meat. The one below that is another, he has a bunch of these versions of the Pope screaming, generally. And the one, I mean, I think the next one, the figure with meat, is so, I mean, he's just putting it there in your face. Even the Pope, the man who is most symbolic of the divinity, the closeness of human beings to God. And I mean closeness in the sense that we are created in the image of God. And by the way, that does not mean that we have arms and legs, and therefore so does God. Okay, stop reading the Bible literally. Dogs have legs too. So God looks like a dog. What's going on here? No. Here's what's going on. Here's the thing that is special about us humans that no other animal on the planet seems to have. Moral awareness. And that is what makes us so special. We are incredible creatures, or have the opportunity to be incredible, if we choose to be good when we know, at the moment, when we know that it would be so much easier to be evil. It's hard to be compassionate. It's hard to forgive someone who has hurt us. But holding a grudge, lashing back in malice, is wrong. And that's why being good is something so praiseworthy, because it's very difficult to do the right thing. That is what makes us special. That is what makes God special. That is what the Jews meant we had in common with God. And I suggest that you learn something about Jewish theology if you have read that passage literally. Study the Jews. That would be important to do. So the Pope is supposed to be the representation, the greatest symbol of the greatness of mankind and how we are so close to being like God. But here we see the Pope. I mean, first of all, his papal throne, the yellow, I mean, it looks like, you know, he's on it, and it looks like an electric chair, grating. I mean, and then he's screaming. This illustrates the deepest agonies of mankind. The Pope is supposed to illustrate all of mankind and what we are. That's so incredible. But what he illustrates here is pain and that we are meat. We are things to be poked and prodded. We are caged. We are animals. We are specimens. And thus you have the meat hanging behind the Pope in this second figure. And, of course, if you notice, the way that the meat is hanging and stuff, it looks like wings, right? Like angel wings or something made of sides of beef. And you could see the blood. And again, he is screaming. For bacon, we put on this exterior that makes us look nice and moral and polite and sophisticated and higher and superior than all the other animals. But when you look more deeply, you see the most incredible barbarism that any animal could ever exhibit in human beings. We are the most sadistic and cruel, and we come up with new ways to be cruel just for the sake of being cruel. It is unbelievable. unbelievable. The evil of mankind. And like anything else, we are just writhing. More so than anything else on the planet. This triptych, he does this often. He uses humanoid figures. They have parts of them that are humanoid. I mean, there's, in the middle one, there's clearly a human mouth with teeth. The last one, there's an ear there. You can see some semblance of ribs. The first one, I mean, the head looks fairly humanoid with hair. But they're these weird figures that clearly, I mean, they're not human, they're humanoid. But as he sees it, I mean, inside of us, we're just these creatures, these monsters. And, you know, in many of his paintings, in fact, almost, well, many of them, the eyes are gone or blotted out or something. I mean, you can't, the one in the middle, the eyes are covered by some bandage. I mean, there's a sense of sickness there and monstrousness, and then the last one is screaming or howling or something. And we're just these bent figures in hospitals, in cages, screaming. Oh, I love Bacon. I love him. He's amazing. And the last one, this is interesting. I think there's much to be made here. So the first, okay, I mean, on the surface, the first picture is a normal, basically normal-looking man. He doesn't really look deformed. Oh, as the deformity of these creatures illustrates the sort of deformity of our souls, right? We think the soul is pure and blah, 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 blah. All this divine talk. I mean, the angel wings being made out of meat. We think that when we die, you know, we become angels. That's a, you know, symbolic illustration of how we feel about our soul. But it's made of this carcass, this bloody meat. So, you know, the first picture here in this last triptych is just basically a normal-looking guy. He's not deformed, and then he becomes steadily more and more deformed till he's just this machine with, there's blood, a blood stain on a sheet, and he's hooked up to things. Bacon is very interested in people, humans as specimens. I mean, the way that we do horrible, brutal things to animals in animal testing. I mean, he puts human beings in that place because just the way that we think that animals are just meat and bundles of instinct, he sees that inside of us too. We are just these creatures with no sense of morality. I mean, stripped of all dignity, just being experimented on, like we do with animals, with aliens, you know, in sci-fi movies or something. And inside we're the same. All those terrible things that we think about other living creatures, that they're only just bundles of body. They don't have a soul. We tend historically not to attribute souls to animals. Giving us a nice justification for torturing the hell out of them and using them for our own purposes whenever we feel like it. So we think that they're just bodies, and people have also said the same thing about, Jews and black people. So we use that same justification that we use to torture animals on certain groups of human beings. And, like, they're just meat. And as he sees it, that tendency in us illustrates that, in fact, there's an important part of us that is just meat, that is devoid of morality, compassion, integrity, that we do things that are so evil, so cruel, so barbarous that they couldn't possibly come from a creature that has any sense of morality. By the way, make sure you understand that, even if you don't torture things or try to exploit anything, I mean, the products you buy, depending on what they're tested on and what kind of wage the workers at those factories in other countries are paid and their working conditions, you are complicit in this horrific, barbarous system that illustrates that we are nothing like God, that we lack all humanity. And that seems to be a real truth about human nature. There's a part of us that is completely inhuman and is completely divorced from the divinity of God. The trick is to be aware of it and to use your moral awareness to be better, I guess. But for Bacon, there's no real improvement. It's just what we are. So, the last one, Mark Rothko, he's, oh my God, one of my favorite painters. If you go if you ever find yourself in San Francisco and you go to the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, I don't know if they have anything by Monk or Bacon. Of course, they have traveling exhibits and things. I don't think, if I'm not mistaken, none in their permanent collection. They don't have any pieces in their permanent collection by Monk or Bacon, but they have many Expressionist paintings. They have a Jackson Pollock in their permanent collection, if I'm not mistaken. And Jackson Pollock is an Expressionist too. The first two, Bacon and Monk, they're just called Expressionists. Mark Rothko is of sort of, well, an offshoot, I guess, called Abstract Expressionism, and so is Jackson Pollock, by the way, because it's abstract art. It's not representational, okay? So for Mark Rothko, it's just color. By the way, Rothko was born, he was born under in Russia, but it's, well, whatever. He was Russian originally, and he moved to the United States. He's considered an American painter. He moved at a young age. He died I can't remember. He committed suicide. Not surprisingly. Maybe the 60s. I can't remember now. I'm sorry. But yeah, he committed suicide, and he's a member of what's called the theological wing of abstract expressionism. So there were a couple of kinds of abstract expressionism. Jackson Pollock is what's called the action wing, so action painting. And so Pollock is the one who is famous for those the drip paintings where you just splatter the paint on the canvas, and it's filled with movement. But Rothko's paintings are calm and still. And the MoMA in San Francisco has one of his paintings, and it's huge. Often they're gargantuan. I mean, they're 10. This one is, I think it's like 15 feet tall or something. Sorry, my kitty. And I went, and the first time I went, I saw it from, like, you know how you can go in one room in a museum, and then you can see, like, the rooms are sort of connected, and you can see, and I saw it against the, like, the farther wall, like, 3 rooms away, and I ran, which, you know, I guess you're not supposed to do in a museum, but I ran over there. As soon as I saw it, I knew it was a Rothko, and I just... Oh, I'd never seen a Rothko. And in fact, we've had one here on loan in Reno at our museum. We had a Rothko for a while on loan from a private collector. And that was several years ago, and I saw that too. But anyway, Rothko, what he was... he said that what he felt like just huge blocks of color. When you take away all of the representational aspects, right? And by representation, we mean it doesn't represent anything, a person, a mountain, any object. It's just color itself. When you just look at these, and his paintings are so big that they sort of engulf you. So think back to the Romantics and that sense that nature, too, just engulfs you. And in that sense, because they attributed the spiritual divinity, God, to nature, that God is running through nature, can be felt through nature, that then you're sort of engulfed by God, connected. You become one. You feel full of the universe, of love, and so on. And Rothko thought the same thing, but he thought that, the best way to do that was not to actually either write a poem or to write or paint something that represented nature. And the Romantic painters did that. They painted paintings that illustrated the greatness of nature, so actual trees and stuff. He thought that just losing yourself in this sense of color, losing yourself in something that wasn't standard in the human experience, because when do I just, other than looking at a painting like this, when am I just hit with just a block of color? I mean, I see stuff, like there's color on the cat, but I see a cat, or the cat ears or something. I mean, I see something specific that is colored, but you never just get this wall of color. So sort of taking us out of the normal human experience is, first of all, what would have to be required to experience God, because the experience of God is not a normal human experience. It's an ecstatic experience. It's a divine experience. It's special. It's so taking us out of our normal experience just to a place where we can contemplate and be lost in this vast expanse of color and the movement of one color into the next. And you could just sort of follow it. And for him, he felt that it was a wonderful way to know God. And so, I mean, there isn't much to say about each particular painting. I mean, the blocks of color. So I just put up a few for you to see. The last one is a photo, actually, of what's called the Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas. And it was he was commissioned to design it and put up the art and so forth. And I think it was meant to be a Catholic church, but I think it's, and it may have been at one point, but they changed it and it's non-denominational now. But they had him, make, and it makes sense that they had him put his paintings into a church, because you just sit there, you can see the little benches, that's the word, and you just sit and you look at these pieces, which are just, they're brownish red, and they sort of, like the middle one is a little redder, and then it sort of fades to brown. And I mean, I'm talking about so there are 3 sections. The middle section, which you can see has 3 portions in it, and there are 2 on the side, 2 sections on the side. I'm just talking about the middle one in there. It's red in the middle, and then it sort of fades into this brown color. And you're just supposed to sit and meditate on that and have this experience of what's called in theology in every single major religion. This is a part of it, although you probably don't know unless you study theology deeply of religions. It's called the ego death. You experience the loss of yourself as an individual, as separate, as disconnected from other things, and from God, and you experience a sense of connection and oneness, and that is what happens in all religions when they talk, and they'll use a different word, but when they talk about enlightenment. Enlightenment means to come to know through experience God, however that religion happens to define God. If you're interested in this topic, do take my World Religions class this spring or in the summer. We focus on connection and how that theme is traced through 6 of the major world religions, and it is. And we'll look a lot, because a lot of people are Christian, so we'll look a lot at deep Christian theology and its origins, which, by the way, are all Greek, and mostly from Plato. Plato is probably the most influential philosopher for Christianity. And if you're a Christian, you probably don't know that. But Christian theology follows verbatim Platonic thinking. And all of the early Christian theologians who made Christianity what it is all studied Plato. And so Plato also had a notion of God, and that to come to know the truth of the universe, in other words, to come to know God, meant that you lost the sense of yourself as a being in this world and separate, and that's exactly what the Buddha talks about in enlightenment, and so does every other religion. Islam has it, Judaism, all of it, and it's beautiful, and that's what Rothko is trying to do through his paintings, get us to have this experience of a loss of self and to just sort of sink into this greater thing, right? This representation of God, and that is the experience of enlightenment. So it's lovely. I love Rothko. Sad man, and that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, he committed suicide. He slit his wrists, and he died. So anyway, so that's that stuff. So good luck on your discussions. Bye, guys.